Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama.
Part 4, Werewolf and the Hitchhiker. Please go back and listen to the others. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? We now sat at our table with our meals and ate. We were talking as we were eating about things that were inconsequential and pretty pointless. She was so easy to talk to. Things just flowed. There was no difficulty in conversation, no difficult silences. We just talked shite all through the meal. I didn't want to kill her or even hurt her. I just wanted to look after her in a way. Strange. My posit was sat bemused, watching and listening to what was going on in front of him, his head going left to her, then right to me in the conversation, such as a spectator at Wimbledon. As we both chewed, his voice came into my head in a moment of silence. Okay, Will, I have to admit, she's fucking great. It was, well, all very pleasant. Now that she was dressed as a lady of the Highland, she had an element of regality to her. I mean, she looked like she was born of Scottish royal blood. She exuded strength and beauty, and all around us the people could see her as she really was. Although the food hadn't lasted long, the meal had lasted for a very long length of time, although it had seemed quite quick in my head. We were now happy and full of food and left a hefty tip for our server. We then made our way back through the snow, which was now much deeper, back to the car. It was about 4 p.m. and the dark was getting darker. She sat back in her seat, closed her eyes and yawned, and I smiled and dragged my jacket from the car's back seat and laid it over her lap, lifting it to her chin and tucked it around her neck. She moaned a little gasp of delight and wiggled away deeper into the leather of the seat. Although they looked closed, her eyes were noticeably cracked and she was observing my actions as she lay there. A smile cracked her lips.
I like it when you look at me that way, Finn. Do you care for me? Do you?
She asked. I laughed and smiled. My face was a brief mask of confusion and worry. Yeah, I think I do, Sally. At this point, my posit just let out a deeper sigh and sunk back down into the rear seat, mentally mumbling profanity after profanity. I think we should find somewhere to stay tonight and get on with the journey tomorrow, I told her. She lifted her head and looked into me deeply with those emerald green eyes. Those bright, intelligent eyes questioned my reasoning for this. I could see the various ideas for my wanting to stop ran through her mind. For an age she stared into my very black soul, and I knew that her final decision would greatly impact how I actually felt. This was a weird sensation. I cared what this being thought of me. Eventually she nodded and gave me her agreement.
Okay.
She then snuggled into the seat once more while I checked to find a local hotel that I could consider. There was a hotel very close, the Old Manse of Blair. It had 5 stars and seemed a semi-decent place. I programmed the GPS and we set off once more. When we arrived, we parked the car at the hotel's grounds and gathered our clothes to take inside. We ran through the snow to get to the reception and burst through the double doors, laughing and out of breath. The reception was silent except for the ticking of a clock, the crackle of a log fire, and the ferocious stare from behind the reception. The receptionist looked at us with quizzically 100 questions already in her eyes.
Good evening, Sarah. How can I help you?
Her tone was already degrading and patronising. I did not know if I wanted to rip her apart or lick her face. I looked at her name badge. Yeah, you've probably guessed it. It was another fucking Karen. Sally stepped in, speaking with authority that I'd really never seen her have before.
Can I get your best room or suite that you have left for the evening, my good woman?
After a long pause and a strained, maintained smile, Karen took her eyes from Sally's and landed them on mine. She smiled at me with a little exasperation. Her lips parted and her tongue touched the boundary of her mouth. Then she turned to her computer. She tapped a few keys a little too percussively and smiled.
We have the paddock suite available, sir, for you and your daughter?
She said as she looked up again, meeting my eyes and smiling. She was doing this on purpose, and she thought pausing would make me uneasy when all it did really was piss me off. I smiled and Fen and I started to walk forward. I was going to grab this woman by the throat and drag her over the desk. I was going to rip her throat out. I was then going to massacre the entire hotel and settle down for the night in amongst the blood, the guts and the gore to have a rest. It was happening. The wolf was coming. Sally must have read my intentions as something like them, and as I walked forward, she reached and grabbed my wrist. Instinctively, I turned to bat her away, but when I looked into her eyes, I saw a mischievous wee smile that I knew meant that she was actually going to deal with this woman. She smiled at me and then walked forward. She tossed her bag so that it smashed into the reception desk at its base, and she walked to it and placed her hands on the desk, somewhat demurely. She leaned over the desk and was on her tiptoes. I couldn't help it. Her pretty little ass was projected in my direction.
Hi, Karen. This is my dad. Yeah, let's say dad.
She giggled and winked at me.
He speaks no English.
She turned towards me, motioning a hand and asking me to come forward. I stepped towards her and tapped Sally on the shoulder, grabbing and squeezing very firmly.
We'll need your best room, Karen. I hope it's okay to call you Karen. Have you got a room for us or not then, Karen?
Sally had somehow removed my wallet from my pocket without me realising and placed the magic black card from its interior on the desk. It did its work. I smiled and checked my now empty wallet pocket. She had definitely stolen it, the little bitch. Karen took a while to gather herself, but she amazingly did recover her swagger. It was impressive to see it done so quickly and so well. She smiled at Sally and grabbed a key card from behind the desk. Opening a hand towards Sally, she said,
Well, here you are. Breakfast is at 8 until 11. We also make a room service breakfast if you feel it would suit your requirements a little more. Thanks, Karen. That's very good information to know. I think we will make it to the breakfast bar. If I can walk, that is, after tonight.
She smiled and whispered behind her hand, thinking that only Karen could hear. She then grabbed my hand to drag me after her giggling, wiggling little body. I looked back at Karen and laughed. Dobre noci, I waved. Then halfway down the hall, I patted my pockets and realised that I'd left something at the desk, so I had to go back to reception. Sorry, can I get my card back, please? Karen now sat at the desk in her little chair and looked up over the half-moon glasses on the end of her nose with her mouth open and slowly passed me the card. I could hear little Sally laughing. This is a British colloquialism. Her tits off, and she was out of control by the time I got back to her. She was actually having to sit on the floor while waiting for me.
I'm gonna pee myself! I'm gonna wee!
She managed to share through her hilarity. Funny, huh? I asked her as I lifted her to her feet and pulled her along behind me like the suitcase that was in the other hand. If I cared what Karen had thought, then it would have been a little bit humiliating. Once we went into the bedroom, her mood changed. Almost instantly, she became fairly forlorn. She sat on the edge of the bed, swinging her new boots and staring at them, and enjoying the mint that had been on the pillow. Sitting there, she just stared at me for a while as I moved around the room. I was organising our respective lives for the night. I was even enjoying this.
Do you actually like me, Fen?
She asked, masticating her minty chocolate mouthful. What? I asked her, having half heard what she said.
Do you like me?
She repeated. Yeah, I suppose I do, I said, opening my bag to retrieve my phone charger and my beard trimmer. She had finished her mint and was looking at the other one sat on its little comfy pillow bed.
Really?
She asked as she flopped onto her back and reached for the other treat on the pillow. Yes, Sally, I like you. I reassured her and passed her an apple from the bowl on the table. Eat this and not that shite, please. I smiled as I took the mint and secreted it in my pocket. She gasped as she inspected the unwanted piece of fruit.
But how much?
she asked as she bit deep into that fruit and spoke with her mouth full.
You have no idea who I am, so why do you even like me?
I stopped doing everything and stared at the ceiling for some time as I played with the toothpaste tube in my hand. Well, I like you because you make me smile, you make me laugh, and you make me feel good.
Do you know?
She paused. I waited for her to complete her question, but she did not. She just continued eating her apple while maintaining eye contact with me. Do I... what? I asked her. She kept me waiting while she chewed a large, lumpy mouthful. Eventually she stopped and swallowed down the contents of her mouth. She still stared, but had lost the confidence to ask the next question, which, to be honest, was probably better for me than for her. I put on the kettle and started rummaging through the contents of my bag. So, Sally, can I hear your true story? I mean, your proper story. Boredom does not normally lead to someone leaving home. She sat up silently, swinging her boots once more. The discomfort that she now was dealing with was huge and difficult for her. Then she proceeded to tell me a very sad story. She had been abused by her father from a very young age and was telling me about Dad lying on top of her as a young child, maybe even a baby. She told me the most intimate details of how she'd been touched. She told me how her mother had known all along what was going on. It was sickening to hear what this man had done to this young girl, stealing her of her innocence at such a young age. She was very extremely graphic in the descriptions, and by the end of it, I sat next to the crying child, holding her in my arms as she broke and let the world's woes pour out of her damaged little soul. This child was a soldier, and something that I could see as a fighter. As she'd gotten older, she'd started to fight her father's efforts, although she would keep the man's activities secret for the sake of her mother. I struggled to know how the mother had ever been able to ignore what was going on under her nose. Did she think it was an acceptable thing for her to do? I respected this little creature, and was almost feeling an intense sorrow for her. Finn at this point was adequately pissed off with the situation, wondering what the fuck was going on. I held her now as she cried, allowing the tears to stain my shirt, allowing this thing to empty itself of all its woes and pain. Eventually it was exhausted, and she couldn't continue with the breakdown that she'd suffered. I lifted her, put her into the big bed, tucked her in, kissed her on the forehead, and wished her sweet dreams.
I'll do something for you now, Fen,
she said, patting the bed. I shook my head. Nah, Sally, you've done a lot for me today. You're fun to be around, and what you've shared with me has been enough for me. Thanks, though, it's much appreciated. Inside, I was in turmoil. I could do something about this. I wanted to go back and meet these humans face to face and engage with them in a manner they understood. She slept soundly that night, while I could not. I sat rocking back and forth as I stared at the four walls while thinking of my next move. My posit spent his time telling me that it was only a human, and why should I give a fuck? Why should I give a fuck what happens to it? I shouldn't. I really shouldn't. But I did. The following day she woke while I sat staring at the walls. She was beautiful, but not in the way I usually like things. It was not attractive in the forms I knew. It was a different attraction. I wanted to care for it and look after it. It was so strange to me. She got dressed and we went to breakfast, where I introduced Sally to the taste sensation that is warm croissants and jam. She had never had these experiences before, and she enjoyed them in a massively over-enthusiastic, annoying manner. But I loved it. Every time she murmured her approval, I laughed and smiled, and she relished my own enthusiasm as I appreciated her. Sally, I said. She saw the serious expression on my face and stopped chewing the 5th croissant, mouth open. She said, I'm going to take you back to your parents. I want to meet them.
What?
Speak to them, and maybe... I want to kill them, I told her sincerely. She sat looking at me. Well, looking into me and assessing her next move. I could sense the confusion in her body as she tried to work out what to do and what to say. She quickly chewed the remaining food in her mouth and swallowed it down with a gulp.
You want to kill my parents?
She asked. I think so. I need to talk to them at least, Sally. I'm something that can really help you. I am something that can kill them quite happily if I wish.
Yeah, I know,
she said. This shocked me and my posit. The posit sitting next to the dish of bacon quickly turned towards her. You know what? I asked.
I know?
She repeated. You know what exactly?
That you weren't joking about the whole werewolf thing.
She replied calmly, popping more croissants into her mouth and smiling. Oh, how? I needed to know.
Well, I woke up at 2 this morning, and instead of you being on the couch, there was this great big bloody werewolf, and you were shivering, so I covered you in a blankie. I thought I'd mention it this morning, or you might, but neither of us did, and you just left it.
I kept her eye contact for a long time, then looked over at the posit. We must sleep transform, he said with a wolfy shrug. I smiled in response. Okay, I said. Doesn't that worry you a little bit? I asked her.
Well, you didn't try to eat me. Do I need to be worried?
She replied. I smirked in response. Who'd want to eat you anyway? You're fucking revolting. We both laughed and got back to eating.
So, would you?
She smiled. Would I what?
You know, kill my parents for me.
I continued eating, looking very seriously at her. She did the same. Eye contact, never faltering. Okay, yeah, I answered, exasperated.
Yay!
She shouted, leaping up and running to my side of the table where she jumped onto my lap and kissed my forehead, making everyone at breakfast stare. I smiled. This was embarrassing, but in such a cool way. After breakfast, we went back to the suite and goofed around until checkout time. We paid Karen and then set off on a beautiful snowy day on a new mission to go kill some parents. Such happy times. Thanks for listening. There are loads of links down into the description to loads of things. So if you have any time in your day and you get bored and you want to have anything to do with this werewolf, then have a check of those out. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama.